Well, hello. It's been good mixing and mingling with so many of you this in the morning. Now we're in the afternoon. I am Eric Brakey. I wear a number of hats. The primary reason I'm here, the primary hat that I'm wearing is I'm the executive director of the Free State Project. And I want to thank, first of all, everyone who's here who is a participant in the Free State Project, who has either you're a native Granite Stater who wants to live in a free New Hampshire and believes in the live free or die ethic that New Hampshire's always stood for, or you are someone who moved here to be a part of the Liberty homeland that is being built here in New Hampshire. Thank you for participating in these efforts. And if you aren't currently a resident in New Hampshire, we hope you like it here. Glad you're checking it out. And there's one thing we have in New Hampshire is many realtors who are ready to sell you your new home. So be sure to talk to them. So the name of this talk is The Monetary Revolution is Here. And in the course of this talk, I want to talk about how the monetary revolution is here, both in a temporal sense, in the sense of like, perhaps this moment we've been waiting for when the old order, the corrupt monetary system as it is, starts to unravel and come crashing down. In that sense of time, it's here. But also in a geographical, physical sense, it is here in New Hampshire, right? More than most any other place you could find in this country or in the world. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But first, I just want to ask a question. Has anyone ever noticed, at least it seems to me, that the story of Satoshi seems a lot like the story of George Washington? I've never heard, I don't know if anyone has ever heard that before. I was talking with someone and it occurred to me, right? The idea of the man who could have been king, right? Who could have crowned himself and I'm going to be the king of this new system. But instead, I'm going to walk away to let this system become something far bigger than something just run by one person and something that every single person can own a piece of. I don't know how much the story of Satoshi is fact versus fiction, myth versus reality. I heard Tucker Carlson say maybe he's really the CIA. I don't know. I just think that the story is really powerful. The mythology is very powerful, and I think as we are talking about one system falling away, just like the colonial system before the American Revolution fell away, and a new system emerging, I think it is very compelling that we have a system in Bitcoin, and I'm not against other cryptocurrencies, but I think so many other cryptocurrencies we see that there are people who have crowned themselves kings of those systems. Whereas with Bitcoin, you have a system where, at least the story goes, the man who could have been king, like George Washington or like Cincinnatus, said, no, I'm not interested in ruling in that way, and gave it to the people. So I think it is an interesting moment. But let's back up a bit. So I'm a Maine state senator. I'm leaving Maine to come and work with folks in the Free State movement. My involvement in liberty politics, and not even just politics, but just politics is not the only way that we advance liberty, though I do believe in it as a way to advance liberty, but certainly I think we see in the Free State that there are many ways to advance liberty, whether that be homeschooling or agorism or cryptocurrency. There are many ways to do it, but my involvement started in the Ron Paul campaign, where I was the Maine state director for the Ron Paul campaign in 2012. And there was this amazing moment when the Ron Paul campaign finished. And Dr. Paul retired from Congress, and after inspiring millions of Americans with his message of liberty, which included a very loud message about monetary policy, right? Naming institutions like the Federal Reserve that most Americans weren't even aware existed and had never really been in our lifetime an issue that was talked about in politics, monetary policy. Dr. Paul made that front and center in his message. And when he finished and walked away, people came to him over and over and said, I want to continue the fight for liberty. Please tell me what to do to continue the fight for liberty. Did this go off? There we go. And Ron Paul is not a central planner, right? And so he told people, I don't know. You have to figure it out for yourself. But there's a job out there for you. You just have to find it, right? And so rather than saying, run for your state legislature, you know, if everyone ran for the state legislature, that would be great. You know, Mark's running.
Let's do it.
We got some good people running and serving and who've done great things in our local state legislatures, both in New Hampshire and to a lesser degree around the country in the tyrannical 49. But people found their own paths. Homeschooling, cryptocurrency, and we're going to zero in on cryptocurrency. Of course, that's why we're here, right? Political strategies alone, you know, Ron Paul advocated for we've got to fight the Federal Reserve, we've got to end the Fed, and the political mechanism available to us for so long that we pursued was we're going to pass through Congress and audit the Federal Reserve. We're going to audit the books, we're going to see what they're doing, we're going to see how they're printing these trillions of dollars out of thin air, how those dollars are being handed out in corrupt ways, and then people will know and will be able to, with that knowledge, will be armed to better transition away from the Federal Reserve and maybe build a different system, maybe return to the gold standard, maybe something else. Of course, we know what happened, right, is Congress was never going to pass that bill. They did pass it through the House of Representatives once, but I fairly suspect there were a lot of opportunistic politicians who voted for it just because they knew it was going to die in the Senate, right? And so trying to go through this centralized political system as a way of challenging the monetary system was a good way to educate people, but not effectively by itself the best way to actually bring about change. And so a lot of people said, we're not going to deal with the politics of it, we're just going to do it, I guess kind of like how Uber overcame the taxi monopolies, right? We're just going to build a different system, and by the time they figure out what we're doing, it's going to be too late for those with political power to stop us. Now, they are still trying to stop us, but it's gotten pretty far, and it seems to some degree that the cat's out of the bag, and they're fighting the inevitable. They can cause a lot of damage along the way, but something big is happening. Now, I think that, as Dr. Paul said, it's no coincidence that the century of total war corresponded with the century of central banking, right? And I think it's no coincidence that here in New Hampshire, I don't know if this is a phrase that I coined or if I got it from someone else, but I've certainly learned this talking with folks who've been involved in the cryptocurrency movement here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire really is the cradle of cryptocurrency, the cradle of Bitcoin. It wasn't necessarily invented here. This isn't where the first Bitcoin transaction took place, but this is where the early adopters were in mass. New Hampshire was a central hub for early adopters, for evangelists of cryptocurrency, and for demonstrating use cases, right? Bitcoin was rocked in a granite cradle in the granite state. Folks here nursed it and helped it grow big and strong to become the multi-trillion-dollar asset it is today. Now, it didn't happen by coincidence. It's not because in New Hampshire there's just a lot more people looking for get-rich-quick schemes, right? That's not why Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies really took off here. It is because of the Free State movement. It is because there is a concentration, and there has been a growing concentration of people here in New Hampshire who weren't just people looking to get rich. They have moral, philosophical objections to this corrupt central banking system, this fiat system, where our savings, our paychecks can be siphoned away from us by people in power to fund illegal wars, mass murder campaigns around the world. And they don't even have to directly tax us from it. They can just steal our money and tell us that it's our grocery stores that are price gouging us, and they're the ones to blame. But in New Hampshire, because of the concentration strategy, you had this networking of people who were ready, eager, and in the aftermath of the Ron Paul campaign message of end the Fed, looking for ways to actually challenge the Federal Reserve when passing Aud the Fed just was not a viable strategy beyond educating people. And I will tell you, for me, so coming off of the Ron Paul campaign in 2012, being the state director there, I was invited to come to the New Hampshire Liberty Forum in 2013. This is the first time I'd ever encountered Bitcoin or cryptocurrency of any kind. I think maybe I'd vaguely heard about it. But at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum in 2013, I don't even remember who it was. That person could be here today and say, oh yeah, that was me, or maybe it was Eric Voorhees. I don't even know. There were a lot of people floating around back then. Someone said, I'm going to help you install a wallet on your phone, and I'm going to give you a nickel's worth of Bitcoin. So that was cool. It's like a novelty. I got the wallet on my phone. And frankly, that wallet sat there for 5 years. But there was that nickel's worth of Bitcoin on it. When I did check it 5 years later, it was worth $10. And I really realized I made a big mistake. To be armed with the knowledge and not act on it early, I've learned my lesson there. But running for the Maine State Senate, I was the first candidate in Maine. I guess 2 years after Mark Warden was the first candidate in New Hampshire. Or I guess he said the first candidate in the world, in America, to take Bitcoin donations. I was the first in Maine in 2014. Got the Maine Ethics Commission to basically write, because of me, they had to write the rules for candidates to take Bitcoin. But I'll tell you, having served multiple terms in the legislature, in the Senate, at least in Maine, like until this past year, you'd never heard anything about cryptocurrency policy at all. In so many state legislatures, maybe outside of New Hampshire and maybe Wyoming perhaps, people are so behind the 8 ball in these conversations, they don't know what's coming, they don't know what's here. Though I did, in this last year, I did sponsor the first cryptocurrency bill to, yeah, you can get excited about that. The first cryptocurrency bill to try to legalize crypto banks in the same way that they were attempting to do in Wyoming. I didn't get very far. I got one vote in the committee. That was me. I was the one vote for it. But we did have some success. I know there's been a lot of conversation, of course, around CBDCs with state by state, the Uniform Commercial Code, which I think overall, I don't need to get into the details of it. Uniform Commercial Code, creating some standardized rules when contracts don't speak to particulars in cryptocurrency transactions. Most of it, from what I could tell, very good, except for this little thing snuck in there where they basically created a legal definition for CBDCs, call it implementing language, where if the Federal Reserve ever kind of came out with a CBDC, then your state laws would be ready to go to recognize them. Anyway, managed to get that struck out. I know that New Hampshire and several other states did the same thing. Passed the overall package, but no CBDCs. But that's really the extent of a lot of the things going on in the legislature that I experienced. But, of course, those conversations are happening in New Hampshire because we have free staters and libertarians broadly who account for about a quarter of the New Hampshire House of Representatives who understand in the large scope of things what we need to be prepared for. As I've always seen it, we're on a very unsustainable course. I think we've seen it for a long time, maybe since the days of the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. And the thing with being on an unsustainable course financially, monetarily, is that we know one day it will come that it all unravels and falls apart. Well, we don't know when that day is going to come. We can just see the trajectory that we're on. It's kind of like if you jump off a cliff, you know that one day you're going to hit the canyon floor. Maybe until you get to the canyon floor, it feels great. Flying feels a lot like falling until you hit the ground. And there's a lot of naysayers along the way saying, what are you complaining about? Everything is wonderful. Look, we're flying. It's wonderful. But that reckoning will come. And it seemed to me that for us who are aware of what's happening monetarily, the best thing we can do is try to position ourselves and our movement and the people we care about to be prepared for what happens. Because when that moment of the unraveling comes, there will be a really big question of what happens next. Now, the fact that cryptocurrency systems, the fact that Bitcoin and others have been built up as an alternative, makes me feel pretty good. Makes me feel like, all right, when the dollar finally unravels, as we're starting to see around the world, you know, that global reserve status that is enjoyed for so long, including the last 50 years since the end of the gold standard. Now we see that the petrodollar is being broken. Saudi Arabia is breaking their agreements and saying they're going to trade in other currencies for their oil, not just USD. We see the BRICS nations forming, trying to form alternatives. It certainly does seem that this moment of monetary revolution is around the corner, whether that's tomorrow or 5 or 10 years from now. Who knows how long they can draw this out. But the question, I think, is going to be in that moment, are we prepared with an alternative, or are they prepared to flip the switch and we find ourselves into an even worse system, right? A CBDC system, a central bank digital currency system. The efforts that we do here in New Hampshire have fueled, I think, the possibility of something better. The fact that we have had New Hampshire, we've had the Free State community, the Liberty community here networking, building parallel systems, I think creates the real possibility of a better handoff when that moment comes, that we will in fact be positioned to transition to a more free society, not a more dystopian one. And of course, money is key to all of that. So I will say I'm not the most technical person. I can't explain to you how the technology of blockchain and everything else works like some other folks here, but I am an observer of I guess political trends and the course of things. And it seems to me that while everyone is fighting for Washington, D.C., and I certainly hope that one day, you know, personally, I hope that Donald Trump gets in there and does some good things for kind of regulatory reform around cryptocurrency, makes it easier for all of us. But we cannot depend on Washington, D.C. going our way. We cannot rest our strategy on we're going to get a person to ride into the White House or on a white stallion to save us. We cannot hope for one day libertarians and lovers of freedom will get elected to majorities in the House and the Senate in Washington, D.C. There's a very perverse adverse selection process. Not only do we have the natural instinct of people who love liberty, we tend to run for the hills, not run for office, where people who love power are naturally inclined to run for office and run for those seats of power. But having run for federal office myself several times, I've seen what this fortified citadel of corruption is in Washington, D.C. They will guard these seats in Congress with all they have, and they have access to a literal money printing machine, which we do not. But by building these parallel systems, building parallel monetary systems, by taking over more locally politically in our state legislatures, we are creating an environment where more and more we'll be in a position where it doesn't matter so much what Washington, D.C. has to say. We're seeing this in other areas of life. I mean, we're seeing how power on the state level can nullify federal cannabis laws. We're seeing on the state level how power over state legislatures is even starting to undermine the ability of the war machine to take our sons and daughters and send them off to wars that have never been declared with things like Defend the Guard legislation. But it is also similarly very exciting to see in states like New Hampshire and Wyoming and a few others around the country that I think the most beneficial conversations about pro-crypto policy is happening not in Washington, D.C., it's happening in our state capitals. And so I guess ultimately the message I would like to give to everyone else is, first of all, if you are already here, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the revolution, the monetary revolution, the overall revolution that's happening now and happening in New Hampshire. But if you aren't, you really should be. Because in that moment when things go bad, we saw this, of course, during COVID, right? Where suddenly it really mattered where you lived. It really mattered. And not just in terms of the policies that were imposed on you from on high. I mean, I will say, in all honesty, the policies from the New Hampshire government weren't the best in the country either, right? It wasn't Florida and New Hampshire, but the communities here were so robust and so well built and so well networked with each other that we could disregard unjust impositions from both the state and the federal government. And more, when the moment when things go bad and things really unravel and that moment of change is happening in this country, where are you going to want to be? Are you going to want to be in communities that understand and value liberty and who are ready to build a free society? Or are you going to want to be surrounded by folks who are just looking for the new iteration, the new software update on status systems? So, let me check time. 12 after. So, all right. So, I'll just say thank you for participating. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the monetary revolution. I know we were starting a little bit late. I don't know if anyone has any questions for a recovering politician, but if there are any questions for a recovering politician and for the ED of the Free State Project, I think we've got maybe about 9 minutes. So I'd be happy to take a few questions. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. Yeah, and they mentioned the strategic Bitcoin reserve at the federal level. Is there any political will in the states like New Hampshire to have a state Bitcoin reserve or localities to do that?
I mean, I think it would be smart. I mean, I think you have like states like Texas that still have like gold reserves, right? I think it's I think certainly if a state like started, I mean, I guess there's kind of two questions there, right? Should a state start proactively purchasing Bitcoin? Should a state start proactively purchasing Bitcoin and building up reserves? I think there's an argument there, perhaps could be made. But also, if a state recognized Bitcoin as something you could pay your taxes in, frankly, I don't know why you would give your Bitcoin over to the state, but certainly it could be the policy of the state that Bitcoin that comes in, that they're not going to sell it and they're going to hold it and keep it for reserve purposes. I do think that, if you're bullish, not bearish, if you're bullish on kind of the trajectory of digital assets like Bitcoin, I think it would be a very smart policy for a state to have, and could help position the state to be in a stronger position as things unravel on the federal level. And as much as I'm not a fan of state power, I am a fan of using state power to fight federal power. And if we can position things here in New Hampshire to be better positioned when the unraveling happens, then I think a strategic Bitcoin reserve could be a very interesting feature. Help us be prepared. Any other questions from any other questions? Yes, Carla Garrick.
Is it true that CD2 in Maine would be interested in perhaps becoming part of New Hampshire?
So this is an idea I've been trying to seed for a while, particularly like on my way out the door in the Maine Senate. I was particularly frustrated with just kind of how radical left Maine has shifted in recent years post-COVID. And there's a lot of folks in Maine who feel very disenfranchised, and it's pretty kind of geographically pretty clear. You have the 2nd District of Maine. There are 2 districts in Maine, just like there are 2 congressional districts in New Hampshire. But the 2nd District of Maine, which is northern Maine and central Maine and western Maine and down east. Actually, it's most of Maine. Everything except for like Portland and the coastline, which has seen a lot of, which is those areas. The 1st District is very progressive, right? The 2nd District has voted for Donald Trump in the last 2 elections. They've elected Republican congressmen. They're very kind of frontier attitude, very rural, leave me alone, don't touch my guns. That's kind of frankly, that's kind of that culture in the 2nd District of Maine is very similar to what you might find here in New Hampshire. But as the progressive areas have grown in population, they've come to politically dominate the state. And now you have, to the point where they're actively working to disenfranchise the voting power of the people of the 2nd District. Maine has something like unique in terms of electors for president, right? They break them up by congressional districts. So the 2nd District can vote for Donald Trump, vote for the Republican, even if the whole state goes Democrat, and it counts. Their one elector goes, right? But we've seen over and over in Maine that the progressives are now trying to push Maine into a national popular vote compact, which would completely nullify the second district's voice in this matter. In fact, wouldn't even just give the second district's voice to like the people, people of the state of Maine. It would give their voting power to Chicago and San Francisco and New York City, large urban population centers. And there've been a number of things. We just had the Secretary of State of Maine trying to kick Donald Trump off the ballot completely so that people couldn't vote for him. People are feeling increasingly disenfranchised. Gun control is passing. A lot of things that are stripping people of their voice and their rights. And what's interesting, I'm actually on my weekly show, The Porcupine Report. I'm going to be talking this next week with the executive director of something called the Greater Idaho Movement. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's very fascinating. It's actually not based in Idaho. It's based in Oregon. It's counties of eastern Oregon that are frustrated being politically dominated by Portland, Oregon, are saying, we want to break away. We want to join with Idaho. And whole counties have, in fact, voted to do that. It's gotten to the point where it's harder and harder for the progressive governor of Oregon to pretend this is not happening and to not talk about it. So I think it's an interesting model, and I certainly think for all the folks that I hate to think I'm leaving them behind in Maine to live under conditions of total tyranny, I like to hope that maybe I'm preparing the way for them to either move and follow us here or to take a page out of the Greater Idaho Movement. And I'll tell you, the 2nd District of Maine is beautiful. Great land, great people. They love liberty. If you want to talk about reinforcements to keep New Hampshire free and to stop the mass holing of New Hampshire, the 2nd District of Maine would be great for that. So long answer, short question. I'd love to see that happen, and thank you for asking, Carla. I got 3 minutes.
All right, I got one.
Yes.
So as a recovering politician, now in New Hampshire, what are the odds of a relapse?
So I'm not in recovery just yet. I've still got a few months to finish out on the term. I am personally, I'm personally looking forward to a break from direct electoral politics, especially if you love liberty, and maybe some folks who've been in their state legislature know this. It can really grate on your soul, right? Being surrounded by so much statism all the time, and there are reasons why we send some people in there and they fall to the dark side, surrounded by all the temptations of power. I think it's healthy to take a break on occasion and to find other ways to kind of serve the mission, and perhaps help other people run and get elected and do good things. So I'm still young. I just turned 36, so I don't know, but I will tell you, I just moved to Dover. Dover is not a good place to run for office as a Republican, and I don't see myself running as a Democrat. Some people say Free Staters should run as Democrats, and maybe there's a good strategy in that. I mean, I think it really makes the Democrats paranoid as they try to figure out, like, wait, which one of our candidates are secret Free Staters? I've heard they've gone on witch hunts where they've actually ended up like falsely accusing actual legitimate like liberal Democrats of like, you're a secret Free Stater, and so it's nice to see them eating their own. I don't think I could fly under the radar like that. But who knows? It's I'm just beginning my journey in New Hampshire, so maybe one day we'll see. All right, I think that's it for time. I really appreciate your attention.